Good evening. I'm Joe Carbonetta, and from the Pasadena Media Center, this is Arroyo Live. This program is produced by Pasadena Media to help enrich the community through informative and meaningful conversation. As always, you can share your comments with us anytime at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. For quite some time, we've been gently but frequently informed of the importance of getting our pets spayed or neutered. Perhaps more recently, select holidays scattered throughout the year have further served as opportunities to remind the public about the significant and lengthy commitments part and parcel with bringing a pet home to become part of the family. All of these messages are for good reason. One recent report estimated that around 4,100 dogs and cats are euthanized each day in shelters across the U.S., largely because of overcrowded and understaffed conditions. City-run animal shelters in Los Angeles reached no-kill status in 2017, but operational budgets, including those necessary for increased staffing as well as for food and other necessities, has either remained flat or in some cases decreased. All at a time when the numbers of animals coming in has been steadily increasing. Tonight, we'll talk with officials at Pasadena Humane about the challenges and successes of caring for and adopting out sheltered animals. Please join me for this edition of Arroyo Live. Joining me are Pasadena Humane's President and CEO, Dia Duvernit, and its Director of Wildlife Education and Services, Lauren Hamlet. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Joe. It's nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to be speaking with you this evening. And I'd like to start out by asking you both to tell us a little bit about Pasadena Humane, and more specifically, your roles and what it's like day to day at Pasadena Humane.
Well, I've been here at Pasadena Humane for 3.5 years as president and CEO, and it's been quite a wonderful organization to be with. We have 135 employees, so we're a fairly large organization, and we have so much going on here that we're excited to share with you. Lauren is, as you mentioned, is the manager of our wildlife program. And Lauren, you want to let him know how long you've been with us?
Yeah, I've been at Pasadena Humane for 5.5 years now.
Well, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the history of Pasadena Humane, and something that's very curious, or I'm very curious about, is why the word society was ultimately dropped from the name, because I do recall it being the Pasadena Humane Society, and now it's simply Pasadena Humane.
Well, it's an interesting history. We were founded in 1903, and the name of the organization at that time was the Pasadena Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children and Dumb Animals. And most people don't know the history and connection of the animal welfare and the child welfare movements. It started in 1866 in New York. A gentleman by the name of Henry Berg was upset by how horses were being treated in the streets of New York. So he founded the first Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the ASPCA, in New York. And he also worked with the state legislature to pass a law that made it illegal to kill, torture, maim, cruelly treat an animal. And that was the first law that made it illegal to hurt an animal intentionally. And so after that, many other areas started to pass similar laws and offer protection to animal through these societies. And the first case of child abuse was tried under these animal welfare laws. Someone came to Mr. Berg and said, we know of this child who is being terribly abused. Do you think it's a case that you might be able to bring because she is in fact an animal too? And so like other organizations across the country, we started both taking care of the animals and also abused women and orphaned children. And it wasn't long, though, before the two movements sort of had their own organizations established. And so we focused slowly on the animals, and other organizations took on the care of children and domestic violence issues. So I would just say in that time, obviously, the name has evolved several times because, of course, we no longer are focused on the prevention of child abuse. And while there are a couple of organizations around the country that kept that dumb animal name, it's not one that most of us still hang on to. So more recently, when I first got here, I had some confusion because when people were saying PHS, sometimes they were referring to Pasadena Humane Society, and sometimes they were referring to Pasadena High School. So for me, that was a little bit of brand confusion. And then our marketing experts started to tell us that across the country, other humane societies are also dropping the society and just becoming Marin Humane, Santa Barbara Humane, Michigan Humane. So not just here, but across the country. And I think part of that is an effort to reach out to younger audiences, and certainly on social media and online platforms, the shorter name is easier to use. Our website is pasadenahumane.org, so it goes with our name. And so I know some people really miss the society, but I would say that the change, I think, has been positive because our community support has increased, not decreased, since we changed the name. And if I ask younger people around here even, what is SPCA? What do those letters stand for? Most younger folks don't even know what the acronym means. And society refers to the fact that when many of these organizations were first formed, including ours, they were membership organizations where people paid annual dues and were members. And we've evolved to a more modern fundraising model where we have donors who generously support us, but we don't have members, so to speak. So the society term becomes a little outdated at that point.
Could you perhaps tell us a little bit about the services that are offered? I know that when most people think of a humane society, they think of the place where you would turn in a stray or abandoned animal. But certainly there's more to the organization than that. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit for our viewers at home what services you offer at Pasadena Humane.
Well, Joe, we say we are more than a shelter, and we definitely are because we offer such a wide range of services. Especially during the pandemic, we focused on a lot of programs that support the human-animal bond and focus on keeping pets with the families who love them. So safety net programs like our pet food bank, or temporary boarding for people who are facing temporary housing challenges and need a place for their pet to stay until they can get into another stable housing situation. And for years, we've provided wonderful humane education programs for children. And that was part of the initial movement of the animal welfare movement, was to involve children in the movement. And so we have summer camps and during the summer, and then we have programs all throughout the year for children. We have even have our own Scout badge that Scouts can earn. That's our Pasadena Humane badge. So we are very involved with youth in volunteer capacities as well. We have youth volunteers as young as 6. They need to be accompanied by a parent until they're 15. But serving the youth in the community and teaching about compassion and care for all living things is really important to us. And that gets to our wildlife program as well. wanting to promote peaceful coexistence with wildlife in our community, provide education around that. Um, and then we also work to rehabilitate uh, orphaned and injured wild animals that maybe will have a chance of surviving on their own once they are rehabilitated. So wildlife rehabilitation is an important part of what we do, and Lauren can share more with you about that. We have a store where we provide products for the folks who need things for their pets once they adopt, or even just for the general community to come in and shop in our shelter shop. We have 5 veterinarians on staff to provide both very comprehensive shelter medicine for the animals in our shelter, but also to provide spay, neuter, and vaccination clinics for the general public. And we are open 7 days a week for adoptions. We really hope to find a new permanent loving home for all the animals that come into the shelter. But one of the things that we're really putting a lot of emphasis on is preventing animals from coming into the shelter in the first place. So we focused on a lot of return to home efforts. We provide animal care and control services for 11 cities. Our animal control officers are equipped with cell phones, microchip scanners, computers in their trucks. So if they are out in the community or responding to a stray animal, the first thing they're going to do is scan the microchip. And if it's registered to an owner, they're going to try to contact the owner and try to just take the animal straight home without it even having to come into the shelter. We're also focusing in our animal resource center. We have a call center where people can call in and ask questions, get help. We also offer pet training classes. One of the leading reasons why people might surrender their pets to a shelter because of behavior or training issues. And so we're offering public training classes. And also we offer post-adoption support to those who adopt and have questions about behavior and training. So, we really run the gamut of many, many services to further our mission of leading the way toward a compassionate and caring community for all animals.
Recently, there have been a lot of animal related stories in the news, and I'm looking forward to trying to address as many of them as we can this evening. But the one I would like to start off with is one that seems to be reoccurring more and more frequently, and that's that there are an explosion of stray animals or animals that are being turned over. I guess people can no longer care for them. A lot of that probably has to do with the economic downturns that we have seen in recent years. I'm sure COVID has played a huge role in all of that as well. And as if that situation alone weren't bad enough, we are seeing situations where there isn't enough funding for such shelter organizations and a lack of staffing. Again, some of that can be traced back to COVID. What are some of the challenges that your organization is currently facing?
Well, our biggest challenge right now is that we have a lot of large dogs in the shelter. And I think that's some of that is related to housing challenges that people are facing in the community. Um, there are many restrictions on larger dogs or the number of pets that people can have, and people are having to move due to housing security and often not able to bring their pets with them. So we have a lot of large dogs and needing to find homes for them. And that would be one of our biggest challenges. There's also a national shortage of veterinary health professionals, both veterinarians and registered veterinary technicians, which are basically veterinary nurses. We have been successful in the past 3 years in adding 3 vets to our staff, despite the shortage. but we still would need more RVTs. So I'd like to say, if there's anyone out there who knows a registered veterinary technician, working in at Pasadena Humane is a wonderful place, and we have specialties in shelter medicine and high volume spay neuter. So it's an interesting medical environment to work in. Um, Thankfully, we have not seen the kinds of rates of staff vacancies that some other organizations have seen. We've done a good job of retaining our employees throughout the pandemic. And we also have not seen, a lot of people thought that there was a wonderful rush for people to adopt during COVID. People found that the human animal bond and the companionship of a pet really helped them to get through some tough times. People thought that once the pandemic started to ease, that we would see a lot of those adopters bringing pets back to the shelter. And I think you probably have heard some stories from other areas of the country where maybe they are seeing that, but we didn't see that here at Pasadena Humane. The animals coming in that we see are not ones that are being returned because people are going back to work. It really is other reasons that you alluded to. I think, some of the economic hardships that people are facing and some of the housing insecurity.
That brings to mind another interesting question in that, um, firstly, I would like to point out that Pasadena Humane is what's considered a no-kill shelter. That's fair to say, correct?
Actually, we don't use that terminology. Um, you know, we do achieve a 90% live release rate, which is what the goal is for shelters that call themselves no kill. But we call ourselves a socially conscious shelter because we think it's a misnomer to say no kill. All shelters should make appropriate euthanasia decisions and should be euthanizing animals that are sick or behaviorally challenged. And some no-kill shelters, we might hold animals to a point where the animals are really suffering due to long-term confinement in kennels and in a shelter. And we think that you need to pay attention to the mental and emotional health of animals, and especially for an open door shelter like we are. We handle municipal contracts for 11 cities, and we're going to accept the animals from those cities. And we don't have, so much control over what comes in. It means that, we're probably generally going to always see at least 10% of the animals that come into the shelter that are not going to have a live outcome. Now, some no-kill shelters are not open door. They are able to pick and choose the animals that come into their shelter, and that can help to have a higher live release rate. But we are an open door, socially conscious shelter that accepts the animals from our community without regard to their medical or behavioral condition. And we make appropriate euthanasia decisions, as hard as that might be. But we feel that that is the important thing that we should do for the quality of life for the animals, and also for the health and safety of the community.
And that leads into the question, if you're trying to maintain a 90% live release rate, how does that work with trying to manage the population so that your shelter doesn't become overcrowded? And what is the average, I'll call it a turnaround time, because I don't know what terminology might be more appropriate, but from the time that an animal is brought into the shelter, the time that they are adopted to a new forever home, what is the average stay for one of these animals?
Average length of stay for us is probably 15 to 20 days, but for some animals, it's very quick. For other animals, the stay can be longer. For example, animals that we're having to hold long-term because of court cases. So some animals may be here longer, some shorter. We also take care of neonatal kittens. So they come into our foster program and can be in our foster program for weeks where they're being fed by our wonderful foster volunteers until they're old enough to be spayed, neutered, and adopted. So they're technically, we're helping to care for those animals for weeks before they're even able to be eligible to be adopted, because all of the animals that are adopted from the shelter have to be spayed or neutered. So it's kind of a complicated question, and it varies depending on the situation of the animal, but the average is about 15 to 20 days.
And as you just mentioned, some animals have a significantly shorter stay, some longer. Earlier, you mentioned that you have quite a few large dogs, and I'm sure for obvious reasons, they're a little bit harder to find homes for because people need to have the space to accommodate a larger animal. And usually larger animals have a lot more energy and require a lot more attention. That having been said, some animals are certainly going to be considered more desirable than other animals, whether that's based on size or breed or age. Are there differences when a potential family comes in to adopt an animal? Are all animals adopted out at the same cost, or are some more expensive than others?
We do have different rates for kittens and cats and puppies and dogs, but not within those categories, no rate based on what might be the perceived desirability of a particular animal. So it's the same for all dogs. And one thing that we do, you mentioned, managing the population. We put a lot of effort into adoption promotions and being open for adoptions 7 days a week. We had 4 fee-waived adoption events over the summer and early fall to help with crowding when it's typically our busiest time of season in the summer. So we really focus on getting the animals out versus, other methods of controlling the population. We do ask sometimes when we know that we have pretty full kennels, we will ask people who have, a need to relinquish their animal if there's any way that they could wait a week or two when we would have a better time to bring the animal in. And we find that the community is generally really willing to help us with that when we have those conversations. But obviously, if someone says, no, there's no way I can keep this animal another day, then we will accept the animal.
Well, another thing that we've seen recently with some shelters is the curtailing of adoptions around certain holidays to discourage people from taking animals out specifically as gifts for a specific holiday because the likelihood of a return is very high. Does Pasadena Humane utilize such a tactic at any time? Halloween, Easter, around Christmas time?
We don't. We try to provide education to the community. In Easter, we try to provide education around, what it means to adopt a rabbit and what the commitment is, and things to think about before bringing a bunny into your home. But we don't restrict, the adoption of black cats around Halloween or rabbits around Easter, or discourage people from getting pets around the holidays, because the research in our industry has shown that a lot of those thoughts are actually myths about, lots of people coming into the shelters to adopt black cats for nefarious reasons around Halloween. It's just not something that is really borne out in fact.
Now I'd like to ask both of you to talk a little bit about what a typical day is like at Pasadena Humane. basically from start to finish, coming in the morning and all of the things that are required in order to keep the organization running smoothly and at peak efficiency.
We have to be nimble, and we've done a good job of that for almost 120 years now, and that's what we'll continue to do. And in addition to the folks who are caring for the animals, or the folks who are trying to get the animals adopted every day by meeting with folks who've set up appointments to come in to meet with a counselor to see about adopting an animal. We have our wonderful philanthropy and communications department that's trying to spread the message of what we do in the community, and also working with our very generous donors in the community who help us to do the work that we do. Our animal control officers are out in the field every day. They respond to emergencies 24 hours a day. It's just a pretty complex operation, and there's a lot going on around here. I'll let Lauren tell you on the wildlife end what that looks like.
It's very different day to day, and especially season to season. We get different types of animals, different times of year, just because of the natural cycles of how nature and the world works. But typically we have a couple of technicians that'll come in and open up around 7 o'clock in the morning and feed any babies their early morning feedings. Because baby animals are used to getting their first feeding right when the sun comes up. So we try to mimic that as best as we can. And so they'll start opening up shop and getting the babies fed, and addressing any new animals that happen to have potentially arrived overnight. We try not to let that happen, but occasionally it does. And then during the day, we open our wildlife helpline at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so we'll start getting text messages from people throughout the day, asking questions about what to do about finding distressed animals. Is this animal distressed? Should they intervene? What do I do about a skunk under my house? What kind of animal was in my backyard last night? All kinds of questions. And so we have volunteers and staff that are manning the lines and answering those questions throughout the day, and then intaking any animals that are actually sick or injured or orphaned, and receiving those animals and doing intake exams and giving medication and all that kind of stuff throughout the day. And then we close the helpline around 5 o'clock, and we stop doing intakes, and then we do our end of the day medications, feedings, all that stuff. And we're out of there by 7 o'clock, hopefully, on a good day. And yeah, it's a great time. We have a lot of fun.
What other kind of wild animals does your organization end up dealing with?
Well, again, it's different throughout different times of years, or different times of the year, but generally we get a lot of squirrels and possums. Those are our main mammals. But we do get some skunks sometimes, and occasionally coyotes, occasionally bobcats. We do receive all different kinds of birds. So, I mean, what kind of birds do you see around your neighborhood? Do you see pigeons, doves, woodpeckers? And then during the migratory seasons, so like fall and spring, we see a lot of other really interesting kinds of birds that we might not see other times of year. And yeah, occasionally we'll get some waterfowl like geese, or coots or grebes that come over from the LA River or other lakes and ponds, and birds of prey as well, hawks and those kinds of predatory birds, owls, so all kinds.
You did certainly mention the mountain lions, and my first reaction was that I can't really think of a time that I've ever heard of a mountain lion sighting in Pasadena. But of course, it bears repeating that your organization services more than just the Pasadena area. So there's quite a large opportunity for you to come in contact with much larger wild animals.
Yeah, in my time, we've never had a mountain lion. That's something we would definitely have to be at the guidance. We work very closely with Fish and Wildlife, so they kind of have more jurisdiction and want a little bit more say in what goes on with like the larger predatory species. So anytime there would be something like a bear or a mountain lion, then we would definitely be working in tandem with Fish and Wildlife.
I was going to inquire about volunteers. You earlier had mentioned that you have a staff in excess of 100 persons. And I was going to inquire about whether you have volunteers and if that 130, or I believe it's the number was about 130 plus, included volunteers, but no, because you just mentioned that there are 1,500 volunteers. And so to sort of piggyback off of that question, which you already answered, is it possible for other people to get involved? Do you accept more volunteers? Is it capped at 1,500? How do people become involved if they'd like to volunteer with Pasadena Humane?
We would love to have more volunteers, and it's really a simple process online. People can go online and complete an application to become a volunteer. Then they are given access to volunteer opportunities, and different opportunities come with different training requirements. The animal handling type of volunteer opportunities obviously require quite a bit more specialized training than some of the other volunteer opportunities we have, like shelter greeter or help with our many events out in the community, our Wiggle Waggle Walk and Run, or our golf tournament that we have in June. So we have volunteers doing all sorts of different types of roles for us here. So there's really room for anyone at Pasadena Humane, and we welcome new volunteers and hope people will join us. Our foster volunteers, I mentioned, are kind of a specialized subset of our volunteers, and we really can use as many of those as we can get. But we know that not everybody can have an animal in their home. We also know that, not everybody can even be around animals. They still love them, but they may have allergies. So there are plenty of things that they can do here that don't even involve animal contact. We have our philanthropy office often uses office volunteers who help with our mailings and other types of clerical activities. So we can really find something for anyone who would like to be part of our organization.
Well, and again, I'm 100% convinced now that you are reading minds, because the next question I was going to inquire about were some of the community-based activities that are sponsored by your organization, and you just mentioned one of them, which was the Wiggle Waggle Walk. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that and perhaps some of the other activities that occur from time to time.
Well, the Wiggle Waggle Walk and Run has been going on for 25 years. It's a really fun event where we meet at Brookside Park near the Rose Bowl, and we have a 3-mile loop around the Rose Bowl, or a shorter 1-mile walk for those who don't want to do the full loop. We get lots of people who come with their pets out, and we have fun vendors and demonstrations in the park with agility demonstrations, and the Pasadena Police Department brings some of their canine unit out. We have last year we had a costume contest. It was in the fall, close to Halloween. There's a big change coming up this year for the Wiggle Waggle Walk and Run. The Rose Bowl assigns the dates when people can have these types of events, and they're not giving out fall dates. So we're moving our event to the spring this year. So we just had it in September, and it's coming up again in April. And we know in this year that's a pretty short window for people to gear up for an event. But we really hope the community will come out in the spring. We think it's going to be a great time of year for it. And And this first year, it'll be just a few months after our most recent walk, but then we'll be having it in the spring every year going forward.
Well, Lauren, you've been silent for a good portion of this conversation, and I would like to know if there are any types of community events that are connected to the wild animal side, or perhaps there are educational programs that are put on throughout the year that your side of the Pasadena Humane is responsible for.
Joe, before Lauren answers, I just have to say I have a meeting I have to get to. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, and we really appreciate your interest and your support.
Dia, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. We certainly understand that you have to go. We're sorry to see you leave, but thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
So the question was what kind of educational programs we have for wildlife.
Yes.
That's actually one of our big goals for 2023 is to do a lot more structured programming for the wildlife outreach. And so one of the big things that is coming up is on, I believe, March 5th. We're doing like a wildlife day, and I'm going to do a couple coyote presentations, which is something that I've been doing in the spring and the fall the past couple of years, where people can come to campus, and I have my little coyote workshop, and we talk about, what's normal behavior for coyotes, how to live peacefully with the coyotes, what to do if you see a coyote, and those types of things. And so this year we're going to extend that sort of event a little bit and include some crafts for kids, maybe story time, still kind of in the works, figuring out exactly what we're going to be doing, but it should be fun. We might even have some like vendors from other local organizations that also do similar things to what we do. And so really trying to partner with a lot of the other community organizations that have similar goals and tap into those communities, because sometimes the domestic people aren't as interested in wildlife and vice versa. So I think we have a lot of potential untapped people in our community that are really interested in wildlife and the ecosystem and things like that. So we want to be able to provide a lot more education around that kind of stuff and how to live in urban novel ecosystems and things like that. We also do like outreach with Girl Scouts, kind of like what Dia was saying. I did wildlife releases this past year and invited some community members and Girl Scouts and things like that to come with me, and that was really fun. That's like the best part of the job, is to get to see the animals released after they've been rehabilitated, and so to be able to share that with more people is definitely one of my goals as well. And then again, this past year I've just done community like little talks here and there. If you have a community neighborhood association, I've given trainings for the police departments. I've worked with the public health departments and shown up at city council meetings to answer questions and things like that. But we're going to try and do some more structured stuff this year, I think.
Well, and a moment ago you mentioned something on the horizon in 2023 would be a little bit of a class or on interaction with wildlife, and specifically you mentioned coyotes, and that turns out to be very appropriate. There was just another story in the news in the last week or so about a 2-year-old little girl that was attacked by a coyote right in front of her father. And so I know that you're talking about having such classes in 2023, but for our viewers who are watching at home right now, perhaps you could give a few pointers about what happens if you encounter a coyote. That's actually not as uncommon as some might think, even living in the city, because we're seeing more and more of these wild animals coming into the city proper as we continue to build out and out into what historically was undeveloped regions. The drought has forced animals to look for water and food. There are a multitude of reasons that you might encounter such a wild animal. So what should one do in that event?
a lot of people don't even think about wildlife in the urban ecosystem, but it's once you start seeing it, it's like you can't stop seeing it. And that's what's happened to me, definitely. And so encounters with different species are going to call for um, different responses, but specifically with coyotes, most of the time they are pretty skittish. They only get to be at most 35, maybe 40 pounds. Most of the ones that I see and have seen brought in are closer to 20 pounds. I've seen raccoons that are bigger, and I'd honestly much rather run into a coyote than a raccoon, if I'm being honest with you, because coyotes, you just you can yell at them, you can throw things at them, and generally speaking, they will run away and they don't really want anything to do with you. Whereas raccoons sometimes they're a little more feisty, a little bit more aggressive, and will sometimes fight back. Um, but but yeah, I mean, the coyote incident that you're referring to, I don't know too much about the specifics of what happened. But occasionally, if coyotes have been fed by people, if they've become habituated because people are leaving resources out for them, or they haven't been hazing them properly, they will get habituated. So it is really important that we prevent these things from happening, that we prevent coyotes from becoming too comfortable with us before something like this happens. And so anytime people see coyotes in inappropriate areas, which can be, in your front yard when there's people around, if you're walking your dog and you see a coyote, that's close enough to make you feel uncomfortable, you should haze it. So you should be carrying things with you that will make noise, things that, or like even a squirt gun. I know I talked to one guy a couple years ago who had his whole cul-de-sac carrying super soakers with them when they went on walks. And so anytime they saw coyotes, they would squirt them with the super soakers. And that sort of like tactile response to a coyote will be a little bit more effective than just like honking your horn or blowing a whistle or something that coyotes will get used to. You have to change it up. You have to be a little bit more creative because coyotes are very smart. There are dogs, brilliant cousins. And so you think your dog might be super smart, coyote's like 10 times smarter probably. And so they're really curious. And so a lot of times when people haze them and they say, I tried yelling at this coyote and it didn't go away. A lot of times the coyote will wait for you to see what you're going to do. If you just start yelling at it, a coyote's going to just maybe stand there and be like, what is this person doing? And if the person just gives up and walks away, then the coyote has now learned that someone yelling at me isn't going to be a problem for me. They're just going to eventually walk away. So what we need to do is we need to haze the coyotes by making noise, throwing things, all of that, until the coyote turns tail and leaves the area. And so that, I think, is a key that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of.
With
That
that,
is one of my biggest advice I can give.
with that in mind, and you mentioned the need to haze the animals, but that coyotes are intelligent enough to stand there and watch you as you yell at them. Is it a do or don't that you charge at the coyote? Would that be advisable or something you would not recommend?
Um, I think it depends on a person's comfort level. I had a friend who lived over by Elysian Park in LA, and he said that he saw a coyote and he would go run at them like it was a seagull, and try and scatter them and just yell profanities. And he said that worked every time. And so I'm not necessarily recommending that, but people have different comfort levels. And so I would say just definitely do not ever corner a coyote, because that will cause any animal to eventually react and fight back, because if you leave them no other choice, then that's what they're going to do. But all the experts say that if you're hazing a coyote and they have an escape route, they're going to take the escape route, because they're smart enough to know that there's easier things. They're opportunistic, and so they're going to go for whatever's easiest.
The next question that comes to mind, of course, is has anyone ever tested the super soakers on the raccoons?
There are actually really funny YouTube videos of the motion sensing sprinklers that I'll sometimes recommend people get motion sensing sprinklers if they have animals that are coming through their backyards that they don't want around. But there's some funny videos of raccoons crawling along someone's fence and getting shot with the motion sensing sprinkler, and you could spend a lot of time on YouTube watching those.
That will have to be something I make it a point to look up in the near future, because that does sound rather entertaining. It might be worth noting that many experts will or have recommended that in order to discourage animals from coming around your home, there are things you can do, such as not leaving pet foods out and making sure that your trash cans are securely covered. Are there any other recommendations? I mean, are those in fact still standard recommendations, and are there others?
Yeah, those are standard for sure. Coyotes specifically are, that's what most people are concerned about. But with any wildlife, they're going to go where there's resources and where they're readily available. So it's really important that people learn, if they have animals that are coming in their property and they don't want them there, first to identify what the species is. So maybe you set up your Ring camera or camera trap of some kind to actually like capture and understand exactly what is coming back there and digging up your yard or eating your goldfish or whatever. Or fighting with your cat a lot of times. Once you identify the species, you can then learn about it, or you can text us and ask, hey, like, what do you think this animal is interested in that's drawing it to my yard? So a lot of times it's pet food that's left out, exactly what you said, fallen fruit off of trees, barbecues that haven't been cleaned properly, or gardens that people have, or some people have bird feeders and seed just gets scattered, and that's going to attract a lot more than just birds. And it's also going to attract rodents, which are going to attract higher predator species up on the food chain as well.
Speaking of entertaining YouTube videos, that's another one I'd like to add to the list for our viewers at home. There are bird feeders that are designed to repel squirrels, and some of those are rather amusing.
Yeah, I also have seen some that are squirrel feeders, and they're like animal heads or something, like, or like a scream mask, and people can put nuts in it. But I really discourage people from feeding wildlife in general. Fish and Wildlife classifies intentional feeding of wildlife as harassment because it can change their natural behaviors, and it helps them lose their fear of humans, which sometimes we think, oh, this squirrel is my best friend now, it'll eat out of my hand. But we really do want to keep those animals with a healthy fear of people, because you might be nice to that squirrel, but it might not distinguish you from someone else who hates squirrels. And if it goes up to someone else who hates squirrels and tries to eat whatever's in their hand, they might be in for a bad time. And also, people can get bit by squirrels. I've been injured more by squirrels than any other animal that I've worked with, and they can cause some damage. So things like bird feeders and squirrel feeders, I highly recommend people reconsider, because not only is that a food source for a lot of different kinds of wildlife, it really is just a best practice to not feed wildlife. And you can get really beautiful native plants instead, and that'll attract birds to your yard. It'll attract all kinds of cool things to your yard without it being an unnatural food source. And it sort of helps keep that like natural balance of things, rather than feeding it, store-bought junk food, bird seed. They're getting the good poppy seeds and things like that, and toyon berries and healthy stuff for them.
Well, Lauren, you just mentioned the squirrels being a hazard of the job, which I would not have really thought about because, of course, we always look at squirrels and their cute and fluffy tails, and we only think good things about the squirrels, but apparently they are hazardous. Well, with that in mind, in talking with Dia earlier, we were discussing volunteers and how they can come and help out with the Humane Society and the husbandry, that the day-to-day operations. Do volunteers get the opportunity to work with you on your side with the wild animals, or are those only for the trained professionals?
Yeah, we do have volunteers in the wildlife department. We try to get interns who are in some kind of like animal science program that are interested in wildlife medicine as a career. And this can be a really good rotation for vet students to come through and learn about exotics. But we also have just like, people who just are interested in participating in learning more about wildlife that don't necessarily have a career drive to do that. But we have a lot of people that come and just hang out with us during the day and do dishes and clean kennels and um, answer the helpline calls. And that's something that we spend a lot of time training people how to do is how to respond to a lot of those calls and text messages. But we got some really great volunteers that have stuck around for a while and are really good at being able to talk to people, especially because it can be a very emotional experience dealing with a potentially injured wild animal or an animal or a wild animal that is maybe causing some conflict. So it is kind of a delicate process engaging and trying to help people figure out solutions to their problems.
Well, and as I mentioned at the top of the program, so often we think of humane operations, humane societies, shelters as places where animals can be turned in if, unfortunately, you're no longer able to care for an animal, or if someone simply finds the animal undesirable. But hopefully that's never the case. But you're also the organization that we should contact if in our daily lives we happen to encounter a sick or wounded animal. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yep. So we service, like Dia said, 11 service areas. And so anyone that comes across an animal that they're concerned might be sick or injured or orphaned, they can text our helpline number.
Can you tell us the number?
Yeah, so the helpline number is 626-344-1129. And we really prefer that people would text us a picture of whatever animal they have encountered and a brief description of how they came across it and any sort of history that they have so that we can make good assessments over the phone. And even a video would be ideal. A lot of times we need to see how the animal is moving in order to make a good judgment about if it is actually injured or sick or orphaned and what the next steps would be. Because a lot of times people call or text us and they think an animal has, a lot of times with birds, they think, this bird has a broken wing, it's not flying away. But I would say probably 60% of those calls are perfectly healthy birds that are either resting or they're fledgling, so they're learning how to fly. And fledglings learn how to fly from the ground, and not a lot of people know that. And so we get to educate people on leaving animals alone and only intervening when it's appropriate. Because if we intervene when it's not necessary, it can cause a lot more damage than it can cause good, because wildlife are very stressed out by us picking them up, talking to them. They're not comforted by baby talk, kind of like, you think you find a baby kitten or a baby puppy and you're just like, oh, you're so cute, I want to pet you and take care of you. Wild animals look at us and they see Godzilla, or they see like King Kong, like we're monsters to them, we're predators. So they are not comforted by us picking them up and taking them into captivity. So we really want to weigh the cost and benefits of doing that. so that's why we ask everyone to text and explain exactly what has happened and what's going on with the animal before they bring it in or before we send an officer out to go pick it up.
And if they do need to contact that number, is that number available 24 hours a day, or is that only during your regular business hours?
So that number is staffed by our helpline personnel from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So they can text and leave messages after that, and we'll just get to them at 9 the next morning. And so we really kind of have a philosophy of do not intervene unless a wildlife expert has expressly given you instructions to intervene. And so anything after hours, it's usually better just to leave it alone. If it's something that's very clearly injured, like dying, bloody, on the side of the road, hit by a car kind of a thing, you can call our dispatch line, and that's the regular Pasadena Humane line, and it's extension 102. And an officer can come and pick it up and take it to the emergency vet for euthanasia.
Well, it is amazing how quickly the time passes. Ms. Lauren Hamlet of Pasadena Humane, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us this evening and telling us all about Pasadena Humane and all of the things that go on in the wild animals. I particularly enjoyed the discussion about the super soakers and the coyotes and the raccoons.
Oh, I had props to show you too.
Oh no!
Can I show you a couple props?
Sure.
So if we want to talk a little bit about the size of coyotes, because we brought that up earlier, I did have a coyote skull, and this is from a female that was hit by a car, and she was about 20 pounds. But coyotes, it looks big when I'm holding it up, but it's very small. So I like to show people this because it gives them an idea of how big coyotes actually are. I know you sent me those questions earlier, and you had a question about how I felt about people shooting coyotes. So the only time that we'd ever actually gotten anything physical from that, it was this arrow that we had received from a coyote that had been shot by this arrow. And then in that same week, we got reports about a bear that had been shot with an arrow too. So we always just want to tell people that they need to follow the Fish and Wildlife laws around hunting when it comes to any sort of wildlife. There are very specific laws about when you can and can't hunt, where you can and can't hunt. And within city limits, it's very frowned upon. And so we definitely don't encourage people to use lethal methods to control the predatory species in our neighborhoods. There's a lot of better solutions than going the shooting route.
All right. Well, again, Lauren Hamlet from Pasadena Humane, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It has been a pleasure speaking with you. I would also like to thank Miss Dia Duvernit. I know she had to leave early, but I do thank her for being here with us as well. And certainly we can all come and see you at the Pasadena Humane Society during regular business hours.
Yeah, they take appointments for any sort of adoptions, and then just call ahead of time and let us know when you want to show up.
Well, thank you again. We do appreciate it. It has been a pleasure speaking with you tonight.
Thanks for having us.
For our viewers at home, if there are topics you would like to see addressed on this program, you can email them to arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org, and we may include them in a future broadcast. Until next time, this has been Arroyo Live. I'm Joe Carbonetta. Thank you for watching, and good night.